Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for Vertical Gardening with Melinda Myers. We will get started in just a moment. We're just going to let some more people join the broadcast and then we'll get underway. Thanks for spending your evening with us. Hi to everyone joining our broadcast. We'll get started in just a moment. Feel free to share where you're tuning in from in the chat. We'll get started in just one moment.
And if any of the libraries, I know there are some viewing parties going on. So if there are any libraries with viewing parties, we'd love to know where you're at and appreciate that you've opened up the library to people to come learn more about vertical gardening.
Got folks from tuning in all over Georgia, Park Falls, Wisconsin, Bloomer, Rockwell, Texas, gosh, Missouri, Green Bay, Topeka, Kansas, Partyville. Let's see, Necedah, Muskota, Partyville. Oh, hello, Partyville. My grandmother's from Partyville. That is
Oh, okay.
wonderful.
That's a fun name.
Yeah. Oklahoma, Pennsylvania. Amazing.
Wow.
Fargo, North Dakota. Tulsa, Connecticut. Oh my goodness. All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? So hello again, everyone. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us. My name is Kelly Bolter. I'm the Adult Programming Coordinator for Milwaukee Public Library. And it's my pleasure to welcome Melinda Myers back for another amazing workshop with us. We're going to talk about vertical gardening tonight. So a little bit of housekeeping. I will post the link to Melinda's handout for this evening in the chat momentarily. And we will have time at the end of the presentation for Q&A with Melinda. So if you've got some gardening questions, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. It's right two icons away from that chat box there. So put your question in Q&A. We'll have time to go over that afterwards. And then feel free to chat amongst yourself using the chat function. We are recording this as well. So within a few days, we'll send out a follow-up email with a link to the recording along with Melinda's handout. And sometimes we have some homework for Melinda as well.
Exactly.
So maybe some follow-up information too. So thanks again for being here tonight. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Melinda. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly, and thanks to all of you for joining us. Vertical gardening is near and dear to my heart. I was a small space gardener for over 25 years. And so even though now I have more room, I still grow a lot of things vertically, and we'll talk about why. First of all, I always like to thank our sponsor. We Energy is sponsoring this series. And thanks to them, we can offer it for free. And working with the libraries is wonderful. Thanks to Kelly and her team at the Milwaukee Public Library for hosting as well. And all the public libraries through Wisconsin and the UP of Michigan. We've teamed up with, this is probably our 5th or 6th year, reaching out to their patrons, but to all of you. I'm so glad we have people joining us from all over the country. I always learn so much when I hear how things are doing in your neck of the woods, and so happy when people in Wisconsin and the UP can join us, as well as those of you that are gardening in other places. Why go vertical? Increase gardening space. I think this is a great example of think about letting those tomatoes sprawl or that squash or cucumber sprawl over the garden. It would take up much more space. And by going vertically, we can increase our gardening space. These are cucamelons. If you haven't grown cucamelons, they're in the cucumber family, but they look like miniature watermelons, sometimes called Mexican gherkin or sour gherkin. They're very productive. It's a vigorous vine, but very easily broken. So you want to handle it with care. It will produce a lot. When the fruit starts dropping, it's ripe. You can eat it fresh. You can pickle it. I think it's a fun plant to grow. It's fun to cover an arbor. It's tasty, and pickling never hurts anything. Cucumbers are another one. Both of these plants, you can see the tendrils that come out that twine around the support. So when we're growing a vine vertically, it's important to know how they climb. Sometimes we have to help them get started. Some plants find that support right away. But cucumbers and the cucamelon have those tendrils that come off the stem that wrap around whatever supports in their way. Now, growing vertically not only saves space, but for many things, it reduces disease problems because you increase light penetration and airflow throughout the plant. You can see a little powdery mildew on this cucumber. This was at our state fair, so about the middle of August, but a lot less than we had on other plants growing in the ground. If you've heard me speak before, you know this is one of my favorite vegetables. It's Malabar spinach, not a true spinach. The hotter the weather, the faster it grows, and it's very tolerant of hot weather. I usually start mine. In fact, I have a few plants I picked up Monday. I usually buy transplants just to get a jump start on the growing season. A little chilly yet for those, so I'm hardening them up. But look at how beautiful the stems are, the pink flowers, and the leaves taste like a buttery, nutty spinach. It goes great in a container. Here, this is the same place we'd grown the cucumbers another year at the State Fair Garden. I usually grow them in a pot or up an obelisk in an area where I could pick the leaves and eat them fresh. I'll use them as a base for my roasted beet salad. Some people will lightly saute them. Don't overcook. My friends in the South tell me that's my problem with okra as I cook it too long and it gets slimy. And so you want to be careful with this as well, that you don't want to overcook it. I haven't had problems with it being slimy because I eat it fresh. Someone told me she uses it as a wrap. She's trying to go gluten-free, so she'll put her chicken salad in and fold the leaves and start eating. This gardener up in Minnesota found a fun way, a little bit of artistic interpretation to grow her Malabar spinach. Pole beans. I'm kind of I like to think low input, not lazy gardener. But bush beans, man, it's bending over and picking and getting out there every day and finding the beans, and it can be very challenging. And I like pole beans for a couple reasons. You get an extra picking. You save space, you're growing vertically, a lot easier to pick those beans and harvest them. And so it's a great way to increase your productivity and make it just a little bit easier. But don't overlook squash and melons. This was at Rotary Gardens. And I tell you sometimes where I've taken the picture. And if you're like me and I'm traveling, I like to go to a nearby botanic garden. And Rotary Gardens in Janesville. And so this year they had a lot of vining plants training up decorative obelisk like this squash. And here you see delicata and another squash. And if you're growing plants with big fruit, you're going to need to sling the fruit. And here you see macrame is back. And so this gardener, this is at Chicago Botanic Garden, north of Chicago, and they did macrame. So it's somewhat decorative as well as supporting the plant. The old days, it was old nylon stockings. Fortunately, I don't have to wear those anymore. Old t-shirts, whatever you can do, you sling the fruit, tie it to the obelisk or the support so it doesn't pull off of the plant or rip the vine down off the support. Tomato and morning glory. I want to give a morning glory can be a very weedy plant. Some are late to bloom. So especially those of us in the north with the shorter growing season, we're waiting. We've got leaves, but no flowers. Early call, heavenly blue are a couple of them that bloom a little bit earlier. They reseed readily. I planted Grandpa Ott morning glories maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I'm weeding out hundreds of them every summer, trying to get them under control. So keep that in mind. This gardener's kind of containing with cement, so that's a good thing. And they've combined it with a tomato. And speaking of tomatoes, you may not think about it as a vine, but of course it is. And if you've grown indeterminate tomatoes, you've probably staked or towered them. You could leave them crawl on the ground, but you lose more of the fruit to disease and insect problems. One of the challenges is finding a good sturdy support. I use Texas tomato towers that fold up flat so they store easy, nice and sturdy, and I have sandy soil, so they really work well for me. Here are T-posts, and they've used fencing either concrete reinforcement or the animal fencing around for the tomatoes to contain those. Espalier, I've seen a couple examples. A friend of mine espaliated tomato. I am not very good at keeping up with the pruning for staking tomatoes, let alone espaliering. But a couple of benefits here. You get better airflow, fewer diseases, less space needed. You do need to be careful that the fruit has some cover. If you make it too open to the sunlight, you might get sunburn. The other thing are stringing your tomatoes, where you have a string anchored in the ground and tied up to a support overhead. And then the tomato, you train it around that string and it grows upright. Make it beautiful. These are rebar tomato cages. And so nice and sturdy and beautiful. As they rusted, they became almost a piece of artwork in the garden. And grapes, growing overhead, doing your food crops, grapes need a lot of pruning every year, not only to maintain the size because they're very vigorous growers, but also to boost productivity. The other thing to keep in mind with grapes, if you're putting this over your dining table or an area you sit, or even a walkway, if you don't keep up with the harvest, the overripe fruit will drop. Birds and squirrels will come in and help themselves to the fruit, and that can get kind of messy. So you want to think about what's going on underneath that, not only from a mess, but shade. If you're growing plants under a vine on an arbor like this, it's adding some additional shade below. If you want some hummingbirds, the cardinal climber climbing up this trellis, this is an elevated garden. And this was my hummingbird garden at Fair. I think it was last year, the year before. And the cardinal climbers, when I grow in a pot, it's a relative of morning glory. I don't find it being a problem reseeding, but I am in Wisconsin. So some of you in the South may have problems with reseeding, but I haven't seen it listed as invasive like we see morning glory. But hummingbirds love this plant. And we also can do perennial vines like honeysuckle. This is Laniceras sempervirens is our native honeysuckle. It's not the invasive honeysuckle. Major Wheeler is a cultivar of that with beautiful red flowers, blooms pretty much throughout the growing season. Hummingbirds love this. And one of the things, I have one of these on an obelisk outside my breakfast nook, and I watch the hummingbirds. I have a feeder in the lilac. And so it'll take a sip from the feeder, then it'll go over to the honeysuckle. It will sip off the flowers. It'll eat any aphids that attack the plant. I find I don't have the powdery mildew problems with this or as many aphid problems with this. Full sun to part sun. Mine faces east, so it has afternoon shade and it blooms prolifically. I'm a fan of the mandavillas. You will often see this listed as Dipladenia splendens. The taxonomists put them all together, but I was at a garden center the other day and they're holding tight to the Dipladenia. It's really a Mandevilla splendens, but you'll see it listed both ways. The ones with the shiny leaves I find are very drought tolerant, don't have the problems with aphids that some of the larger leafed, more textured leaves. Sometimes I have complaints about aphids on that. One of the reasons I'm a fan, I have a west facing, my house faces west, very open, farm fields to the west, lots of wind, brutal heat and sunlight, and the mandevillas have held up in the heat, the drought, and the wind. Giant peach, I grew it for the first time last year. This is not my plant. I had it in a pot with an obelisk at our state fair, and it received lots of wows from the crowd. Beautiful blooms, big plant from Suntory. Check out their Mandevilla collection. Clematis clematis. There are many types. So if you're in the South, you are probably growing some that bloom on last year's growth. Those of us in the North, the plants, often the flower buds, those plants don't seem to do as well for us. If they bloom on old wood, so as the leaves are emerging, the flowers are formed, you're going to do your pruning afterwards, because if you prune it back, you're eliminating the flower buds. Those that bloom in the summer and fall, bloom on new growth, and you can prune those back during the dormant season. We prune to manage the size to remove stem wilt, which is the stems turning black, and we cut those right back to the ground. It's in the crown of the plant, not the roots. So pruning, and often after a few years, that stem wilt corrects itself. There's a link in the handout to information on pruning, the different groups of clematis and the pruning. But I think if you keep it simple, when does it flower? And then prune accordingly. And this is Sweet Summer Love Clematis. It's a sport or a hybrid from Sweet Autumn Clematis. I have not seen that this is a problem being invasive. Fragrant, blooms earlier like August with tiny purple flowers that you can see. Fragrant, very vigorous, beautiful plant. And then maybe your trellis is really what dresses up the wall, especially if you're waiting for a perennial vine or a rose like you see here to cover it, that having a beautiful trellis gives you that way to dress up the wall until the plant takes over and improves the look. How about some containers with vegetables? Now, I struggle with cocoa mats. I'll be honest. It's for me hard to keep them moist. If you love them and they work for you, that's great. I know some gardeners line them with black garbage bags, punch holes in to conserve the moisture. Some folks will put disposable diapers in there. Um, I've used the aqua liners, and they have a little bit of plastic inside the cocoa mat, and that seems to hold up well. Or if you can get a container to fit inside that metal holder, you could set that inside the cocoa mat, and then the cocoa mat gives you the beauty, but that plastic container inside helps hold the moisture. And I find that just makes it easier, and I'm much more successful. This was at Chicago Botanic Garden. I think this was in their English walled garden. And I just thought, what a cool idea. Now, granted, pots that little, you're watering several times a day during the heat of summer. This was, as you can tell, spring, because those are all grape hyacinths. But what a great way to display some of your favorite smaller plants. Really kind of one of those moments where your guests will go, what a cool idea. But you don't need a lot of space. These are just shelves right by the front entrance with some shade tolerant coleus. And I thought, what a great way to dress up that entryway, even when space is limited. I think this is an elevator conveyor buckets from an old grain silo. And I was looking up online, and you can sometimes buy those still for, I'm sure, a pretty price. But I love what this gardener did. So the top plant is pink polka dot plant. Pink and white polka dot plants seem to be coming back in vogue. I first grew them as a house plant many years ago. Now they're very popular in containers and as even ground covers, annual ground covers, very shade tolerant, as you probably guessed, because they've mixed them with impatiens, and neon pothos is the plant on the bottom. This was one of my one year I planted my tiered planter with Madness Plum Crazy Petunia. I loved them so much, I put them in a bunch of beds as well. Always finding something that did well in this tiered container was kind of challenging. Some years we just didn't talk about it. But as you know, there's lots of petunias, and you can get the wave petunia, 30 years old, celebrating their 30-year anniversary of wave petunias. But there's lots of different varieties out there that have different growth habits, different lengths of stems with minimal deadheading and pruning needed. Here we've got nasturtiums. The leaves and flowers are edible, and pansies. And pansies are also edible. I like to freeze them in an ice cube tray and put them in my water when I serve sparkling water or lemonade or another beverage. It just kind of adds a little gourmet. Put the leaves or the flowers of the nasturtiums on a bed of greens. Just make sure they haven't been treated with a pesticide. This gardener dressed up their fence with marigolds, and I think marigolds are kind of making a comeback as well. One of the cool things, you can start them from seed and get flowers in 8 weeks. So I find zinnias and marigolds are a great way to extend your budget. So I like to buy cool new plants, which tend to be pricier, but I have a lot of space to fill. So mixing in some of those tried and true, more common varieties helps me extend my budget. But look at how pretty, how that brightens up that corner of the fence. Maybe a good, hey, there's a corner here, stop and don't run into it. Now, you may decide that the container, we don't even want to see it. I love this planting. There is a container underneath, and they design their garden to just cover the pot. So it looks like this is sprouting out of the wall. How about dressing up your wall or fence? In this case, the fence is a pretty fence, but picture it without that clematis. What a nice double clematis, sparky pink. And just a good way to define space, mark the edge of a pathway, and dress up a fence. This was at the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, UW, University of Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, west of the Twin Cities. Great place to go if you're up in the Twin Cities area. This is Sunny Susie Thunbergii, black-eyed Susan vine, you may know it as. I find I mine in a really hot, really sunny area, it kind of struggles and tends to have spider mites. I find if I grow it on the east side of my house, it gets plenty of sunlight, it blooms really well, it seems to thrive. Where on the west side, I kind of had to position it behind other plants. And it looks like there's cypress vine. See that really ferny growth? Another morning glory relative in that area. But isn't this beautiful? So, kind of delineating areas as a divider like you would use. This is a garden in Vermont, and this is the European weeping larch, and they trained it over a low railing. Again, you can see the path on the left, and it divided up the different garden beds. You can kind of see they've used different plantings to really help define the spaces, the different spaces. The European larch, our southern friends, it's a little too hot for you to grow this one. Hardiness ratings are in the handout, so I don't want to go by my memory. I checked them all. So the hardiness ratings and a little more detail on size is in the handout as well. So I wanted to give you an idea. This is a deciduous conifer. So it forms cones, so it's a conifer, but its needles turn kind of a yellowy amber in the fall. The needles drop, don't panic. It's not dead. But if you wanted an evergreen that can held its needles all year, this would not be a good choice. When the interlocking walls first came out, and I was looking at a lot of different landscapes, I was on a couple of judging committees, and it was like, oh, I could build an 8-foot high wall, and it was kind of felt like it was driving by on the freeway. So I loved what this gardener did. They used them to make a retaining wall and then filled it with plants. So you can see the coral bells kind of tucked in. They left some space for planting and tucked some coral bells in the front wall. And that looks like buddleia in the middle, a non-invasive compact variety, and of course some salvia. Take those plants away, that's pretty much in your face kind of building. So the wall helps hold the soil in place. The plants really soften and make it appealing. This is at Rotary Garden in Janesville again. This is creeping juniper, one of the creeping junipers. Junipers tend to be animal resistant. They love hot, dry conditions. That's where they thrive. The Chinese junipers are somewhat susceptible to Phomopsis blight, but that usually occurs when the plants are stressed. So as long as they're getting the care they need, and they're pretty tough, they'll do fine. But isn't this beautiful? The rock wall is pretty in and of itself, but this really softens it. For the shady areas, how about Japanese forest grass, Hakata cloa? It likes moist, well-drained, shady soil. It needs moisture, especially when getting established. I had to move mine to a place where I was more likely to water it to get it started growing in my old house. You could also do a sedge as well, but this is the one of the only ornamental grasses that will tolerate shade. But look at that. And even in the winter, when it's all bleached out, leave it intact for the winter, and it really even looks attractive then. This is in California. It was at a home and garden show I spoke at, and I was trying to find the name of these walls, which I'm not sure they make them anymore. And it's rosemary. So those of us in colder climates where rosemary is not hardy can't grow it, but there are other herbs we could grow. We could do some thyme and have it creeping down. Oregano, which is very aggressive, or mint, making sure it can't spread where you don't want it. But there are lots of options. Thyme takes full sun, well drained to dry soil, so perfect for a wall installation. This was in Salt Lake City, where they have very little rainfall. And so this was an elevated garden. And then they used fountain grass, perennial fountain grass, which used to be Pennisetum. And I just learned it's been renamed. So I put the new name on the handout as well. But what I liked about this divided a couple of areas. This was a business building. And so they had the dining area you can see in the back. Then there was a sitting area in front. So this divided the space and provided some privacy. If you like sweet potato vine, you might want to try Solar Tower Black Sweet Potato Vine. It climbs with a twining stem. And with the vines, I talk about the type of stem, the type of attachment in the handout as well. So if you've grown sweet potato vine, it's usually used as a trailer. This was introduced a few years ago. There's a green as well as the black variety, and the stems twine around whatever support, so it gives you that vertical accent, which I think can be quite striking. So even though you're not going to get flowers, you may, but not many towards the end of the season, you still have that beautiful foliage. Hyacinth bean vine is an annual, one of my favorite, and what a name, Lob Lob. And it's a vigorous grower, as you can see here, trained up on this arbor. And it's got leaves, it's related, it's in the pea family. So it's got leaves that look like a bean, other beans. And these are the flowers, very beautiful flowers, and fruit that's attractive. Now, I didn't put information about eating the beans because when I've done some research, they talk about them being edible, but you have to boil them, rinse it, and you change the water 4 times. And in my book, boy, why would you want to take a chance? So if you opt to try to eat those, be sure to do some research so you prepare them properly. This vine is annual, but it will reseed. I've had pretty good luck with it reseeding, especially in my Milwaukee house, which is a little protected, and the plants grew quite big in that from seed that year. This is in Bouchard Gardens in Victoria, Vancouver, and you can see on their arbor, you can see the wisteria, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, hanging baskets and containers. So they kind of did everything from the ground up to create vertical interest. Again, at Bouchard, they did hanging baskets on these structures. That's Silver Falls dichondra. If you've grown that as a trailer, look at how large it gets. Now, they're much warmer than I am here, and their season is much longer, and it's a nice, usually a cool summer, though they've had hotter summers recently. But Silver Falls dichondra can really add, cover up, and create that nice vertical interest almost from the ground to the support. And you could do that on an overhang in your house as well. Here we've got sweet potato vine trailing down. And this is Acerina, the vine that you see with the red flowers. And so again, just using a mix of annuals. And one of the things I like about this, can you see the first fuchsias? There's fuchsias peeking out of the coleus on a couple of the different pots. And so often when we think about growing fuchsias, great for hummingbirds, we think about a container of nothing but fuchsia. I think they mix together so nicely with other plants. So kind of think about combining them that way. This was up in Quebec, and if you've grown, this is black-eyed Susan vine, Thunbergii, and not only was it trailing down, but it was climbing up the support where those pots were hanging. I was at a nearby grower one spring, and I went into their greenhouse, and they had paper plates on the hangers over their black-eyed Susan vine. I'm like, what are you doing? They're like, well, they'll keep climbing up the support and onto the system with the drip irrigation that they were trying to contain it to keep it as a trailing plant only. So this might be an option. I mean, look at how beautiful that is. And boy, that's going to get people wondering what you did. Vertical interest. So this vine, this looks like black solar tower black sweet potato vine. So the obelisk is as much a part of the vertical interest as the vine. Putting those pots in the garden, and I have to be honest, when that trend started, I was like, oh, I don't know. But boy, take that container away, the garden would be beautiful, but it would lack that focal point, right? And then the elephant ears are being echoed by the elephant ears in the border garden. That's a hibiscus with the purpley red foliage on the left and Angara sticking out on the right. I talked about Mandevilla earlier, but this is another one that you might want to use. You can see there's a wide selection to use as a vertical interest. And again, training it up in the garden or the edge of the garden, not just by the house. This is using containers, but they've elevated them at different levels. They've repeated the plants for unity. So we've got the cordyline, we've got ornamental kale, the yellow are bidens. And so what's cool about this is by repeating the plants, you unify that. So you get a greater impact, but you've used 3 pots at different heights to get kind of that nice vertical interest. This is nice and secure, but if you're using dividers for support kind of out in the open with nothing behind them, just making sure they're nice and secure to the ground, especially if you're in a windy area. And that's the concern I would have. In my yard, I couldn't do this. The pots would be blown over, the support would be blown over unless you anchor it. I've used the tent stakes that you can get to anchor some of my obelisk in the ground or support like this to give them that extra support where it's windy. But adding a different element, so kind of providing an edge to the garden, vertical interest. For more tropical look, here they've got a palm for that big vertical interest, shade coleus, some nicotiana, getting enough sun to get some coleus, some nicotiana to bloom, and diamond frost euphorbia. One of the benefits of doing this is if you have a narrow bed, look at how narrow this garden bed is. When we put drastic change from tall to short, it gives the illusion of depth. And so doing this, it makes that garden area appear larger. This is a tiered planter full of vegetables and herbs. I spoke at Epcot years ago, and this was part of the display they provided, but isn't that gorgeous? So you could harvest. We looked at that solar tower sweet potato earlier in a big pot by an arbor, but here it is in a pot on an obelisk, providing kind of marking the entrance to this other garden area, but also marking the bench for seating. My friend Jerry does amazing containers, and this is one of his from years ago. But the reason I like this, his house is 2 stories, and he's got this one large pot in front of it. And often it's hard to keep things in scale, right? A 2-story house can really overwhelm a container. And so here he's trained up morning glory, heavenly blue morning glory. He's got some papyrus coming out the side. So he's got lots of height here to keep it in scale with the house. And then trailing calibrachoas and some lantana. Again, just using individual pots, but elevating them at different heights in the garden. And then, you've got a beautiful piece of artwork in the corner. That arbor with the vine just really sets it off and frames it. Maybe you're going to use some vertical accent by your entranceway or to transition from one garden area to the other. This is a beautiful clematis right by the door. Here, and I'm not sure what the vine is. It kind of looks like it could be either hops or grapes, but sometimes we get these arbors and I see them in the middle of the yard, my pet peeve, and you walk it through the arbor and you're still in the yard. Make a garden around it or use it like this to transition from the walkway, guide people to the sitting area, transition from one area to the other, make it an entrance from one garden space to another. This is Arctic Beauty Kiwi. This is a male variety that has creamy, variegated leaves with a little pink blush usually. It's a male, so hardy kiwis, the Actinidia, are male and female plants except for acai. And so you'll need one male for every 1 to 5 females for fruit. As you can see, it's a vigorous vine. And I have to tell you honestly, I have a whole planting of these, not Arctic Beauty, but male and female um, hardy kiwi. And the fruit are the size of grapes. And my plants are 12 years old. And they finally started producing fruit the last few years. So you've got to be patient. I kind of was ready to give up. It's just a screen. But I started getting flowers and fruit a few years ago, and boy, they make great kiwi. You could eat them, just eat the whole thing, skin and all. It's not hairy. You can, I made kiwi liqueur out of mine. A friend of mine, if my harvest is good and I beat the birds to it, he's going to make some kiwi wine, and I'll let you know how it goes. Sweet autumn clematis. I love this plant. Fragrant flowers, but it is invasive in some areas. So before you plant it, think about it. This gardener, I loved her entrance. This is from the driveway going into her backyard. And when we shot there, we shot a Melinda's Garden moment there, and the bees were buzzing. They didn't bother us, but it was, you'd hear the sound, you had the fragrance, you had the beauty. It really called to a variety of your senses. And so adding some fragrance with the plants you select can not only make it a beautiful entryway, but also one that's fragrant. I love the fact there are lights here as well as a climbing rose. And so, if you need an area you'd want to light up an entranceway or the garage door, you come home late, what a great way to do it. Make it decorative as well. This is just another picture of that grape arbor from Minnesota. This was a garden in Michigan. I was lucky enough to tour. It was a huge property, but he used archways very effectively to help kind of delineate different areas and invite you into that next space. I mean, don't you just want to go and see what's beyond that arbor? I don't know if this planting's still here. This is at Rotary Gardens years ago. Camperdown elm trained over this arbor, and what a nice approach. Somebody showed me a picture that Camperdown elms could get very big. So this has been pruned to manage it and trained to manage it in this manner. Just a decorative arbor as well as nice plantings. Bittersweet, American bittersweet. This is not invasive. Oriental bittersweet is, but this is a very vigorous vine. You need one male to pollinate every 1 to 5 females to get fruit. And why grow this? Well, maybe for a screen, but you really want the fruit. And so you want to make sure if you're going for the fruit, you have at least one male for every 1 to 5 females. And I like to buy my plants separately because if one dies, the only way you can tell the difference is by looking at the flower, and they're not that showy. So having them, I buy a male, label it, have your females label them. So if one of them dies, you know who to replace. The good news is American Revolution out of Bailey's Nursery is self-fertile. And it's a very vigorous plant, but you only need one. So it will pollinate itself and form fruit. And it is a cultivar of American bittersweet. Now, I've showed you some really big plants. So bittersweet is huge. Wisteria is a big plant. Now, I'm going to recommend growing American or Kentucky. So my friends in the South, the Chinese and Japanese wisteria have escaped and are taking over the woodlands. And so it's invasive. For those of us gardening in the north, it doesn't flower reliably. So you get lots of leaves, but no flowers. And why grow it? But the American and the Kentucky aren't invasive. It blooms with the leaves, so it's hardy. You'll get flowers and they're fragrant. It will take a few years for them to get established and mature to start blooming. And you will need to do regular pruning to manage the size, so you need a huge support. This is Summer Cascade. Look at the beautiful flowers, and just can you imagine the fragrance? But let me show you why you need a strong support. It is a big plant, so make sure your support is secure in the ground, strong enough to hold the plant, and then do the pruning needed to manage it. This is trumpet vine, and trumpet vine is native. It's very vigorous. As you can see here, they trained it up over the roof of the garage or kind of to the front of the garage. Now, with trumpet vine, it's a great hummingbird plant. The biggest complaint I get is no flowers. It's a luxury feeder. So you want to be careful. Don't do a lot of heavy fertilization around this plant because those roots will reach up, take up the nitrogen, grow more vigorous, but not flower. It also needs to be mature. So it can take 5 years before the plant is mature and begins to bloom. So don't give up on it. The other thing to keep in mind with trumpet vine is it suckers readily and not just at the base of the plant, 10, 15 feet away. And so a lot of people have ended up ripping out their trumpet vine and going with maybe the native honeysuckle vine that it has a lot of hummingbird appeal, but is a lot easier to manage. But again, make sure your support is large enough and strong enough on these big, vigorous vines, and also the right support. So this is climbing hydrangea. Like Virginia creeper, it attaches with root-like holdfast. So they're root-like and they attach to a rough surface. So this is great for training up a brick wall or masonry. Some people will grow this up tree trunks because it doesn't wrap around the trunk. If you are training it up something wood, you want to make sure you're okay with that because that's going to end up rotting. So don't train it up the side of a wood house or even a vinyl siding because you'll end up staining that siding. So better to put it on a support or if you have a brick or mason house. The other things that I mentioned are twining. You need some way for that twining leaf petiole like on clematis or the stem like on the sweet potato vine or the tendrils like on the cucumber to wrap around to do its climbing. And then you want to make sure that if you are training a vine up next to a fence or your house, that if you're going to have to access to maintain that house, that you have access, leaving space for airflow to reduce disease problems or for you to get in, or using annual vines. I've also seen trellises with a hinge at ground level that people carefully bent over so they could get in and do any painting and needed repairs. So keep that in mind as you're training plants up next to a wall or your home. Vertical gardens are great for screening as well. This is a rooftop garden in Manhattan. We did some shooting for Great Lakes Gardener there, and you kind of forgot you were in the noisy downtown Manhattan because she did such a great job planting containers to help soften the noise and the view. Climbing roses, look for those that are hardy. I grow a lot of the Explorer series that are hardy, that are shrub types, but can be trained as climbers, but they're vigorous too. And so look for those suitable for your environment. Dutchman's pipe is a woody plant. I think it's hardy to zone 4. The flowers look like little pipes. They come out with the leaves, so sometimes you have to look carefully. It's shade tolerant. And pipevine swallowtails use this as a host plant. Now, for those of us in the north, sometimes it depends on the wind, where the wind blows, if they end up coming to our neck of the woods. But it's so much fun to see the caterpillars. I have a pipevine by my shop, and I noticed all these holes on the leaves, and I started looking and found the pipevine swallowtail. So it was very exciting. And I always am peeking around looking for the flowers as well. But look at that dense cover, a lot of privacy there. Here, just separating the driveway. Who wants to look at the car in the driveway or your driveway when you're sitting in the backyard? So using lattice and a clematis to just kind of separate those spaces. Add a little artwork to make it decorative as well. And I've seen some of these rebar planters for sale. This was at the Northwest Flower Show years ago, but I love this idea of having, you could replace the pots seasonally, or if one plant dies, you can replace it easily. Just a little different look and feel. I showed you the solar tower black sweet potato vine. Here's the rest of that support. So a lattice support with a raised bed garden filled with zinnias. And I love what this gardener did. You'll see the lace curtains, that's their bedroom. And so if they want to come out and have coffee, they still have a little bit of privacy with the way those containers are arranged, but they can still see out into their yard. They have a party, there's different levels, and the containers really make it a very welcoming space. Hanging baskets I showed for vertical interest and expanding your garden space, but also for privacy, as you see here. This gardener loves the tropics, as you can guess, and so she just surrounded her deck with lush tropical plants and containers to really create that sense of privacy, but also with a tropical flair. Coral bells and hanging basket, and I think that's Virginia with the big round leaves. This window is the bathroom window. And so they were using these hanging baskets at different levels to kind of screen that bathroom window a bit, and then also add some vertical interest. Back at Chicago in the fruit and vegetable island, they have hanging baskets with edible kale, some pansies, that's scavola in there, which is great heat and drought tolerance. And this was a raised bed with containers on that elevated wall, that low wall with kind of like a window box kind of container, railing kind of container, and then the hanging basket. So you could see in the garden beyond, but it defined the space and gave a bit of privacy. And they also train tomatoes up a trellis for a screen. So not only are you reducing disease problems by training them upward, increasing airflow and light penetration, making it easy to harvest, but also providing some screening. I was lucky enough to work with great courses, and one of the classes was on containers. And you could see the lattice. That's in the back part of Marcy's deck, and she was the one from Great Courses. We were landscaping her deck, but it was small and she could see right into her neighbor's deck. So she convinced them we needed to landscape their deck. And this is in Virginia, so it's milder than where I garden. So the boxwoods are left in their nursery pots, but elevated on old nursery pots turned upside down. Shenandoah switchgrass, a shorter switchgrass in self-watering pots, and you could see black lace elderberry peeking through. We just wrapped the area with burlap to cover the mechanics. This was a tip I learned from another gardener, but she got the privacy. They didn't see into her deck, and it was a win-win for everybody. This is back in Vermont. So the guy that had the weeping larch also used asparagus as a divider. And a friend of mine, Charlie Nardozzi, wrote the book Foodscaping and had a great picture of somebody who used asparagus as the hedge between their front yard and the neighbors. So you get to harvest in the spring. Then when the greenery comes up, you've got some nice soft texture and you've got a bit of screening. Now, it's not year round, so keep that in mind. So it might be an area where you only are out in the summer or for a shorter period. When we're looking at screening, we want to try to avoid monocultures whenever possible. One question I get often is, how many arborvitae do I need? And I want to block the view from my front curb to the back alley. Well, what happens? One plant dies in the middle of that planting, but not right away, right? It's when they're 6 feet tall. So do you remove it and put a little guy in its place? Do you buy something a little bigger and maybe damage the roots of the ones on either side of that? When we mix it up, if possible, that allows us to take, replace as needed. So maybe you want to mix it up. Here they've got some shrubs, they've got a weeping spruce, they've got some artwork, different levels of screening. And you could do something edible. There's lots of columnar apples that are much more productive. Most are 2 to 3 feet in diameter and 8 to 12 feet tall, and they tend to start producing the first few years. And so look how easy picking that would be. You need two different varieties to get fruit. So there's the urban, I have listed on your handout, urban, the sentinel, which you'll see here. These are red and golden sentinel apples, making a nice screen around this fire pit so they've got privacy from the rest of the landscape here. So check it out. There's some listed and they're getting much better. If you've grown Cornelian cherry dogwood, it blooms yellow flowers before the forsythia. This is Golden Glory. It's an upright, it's wide, but it's 15 to 20 feet tall and about 10 feet wide. This is a backdrop to a perennial garden at Berner Botanical Gardens. And here you can see the backside. You can't see into the perennial garden, and there's the fruit. It's edible. Birds will eat it. It's somewhat astringent, but it makes great jams and jelly and very tasty wine. So you've got flowers, you've got fruit, you've got bird appeal, and in the fall it turns purple. So you've got 3 good seasons of interest. If you like serviceberry, great spring flowers, fruit you and the birds can enjoy in June. Excellent fall color. This is Standing Ovation out of Bailey's Nursery. It's the Ulnifolia group tend to have larger fruit and be very productive. 15 feet tall and only 4 feet wide. So there's space. You can add this to even a small space garden. Purple Pillar, Rose of Sharon. If you like Rose of Sharon, one of the benefits it blooms later in the season. Purple Pillar is more narrow and upright, but still can get up to 4 feet wide, 10 to 16 feet tall. Hummingbirds love this. Tends not to reseed like some of the other hibiscus. It's in the hibiscus family, but it blooms as a lot of plants, a lot of our shrubs are fading out for the season, and it comes in and adds purples and pinks and other wonderful colors. I've got to find a better picture. I haven't found any tower elderberry that are mature. It's still for sale. So if you like black lace, it can be kind of a wide plant. Great substitute for Japanese maple, where Japanese maples aren't hardy, but nice texture, great purple foliage all season long, pink blooms. And this one's more narrow and upright, so only 3 to 4 feet wide and 6 to 8 feet tall. Chokeberries, aronias, the name describes the fruit. It sucks the spit right out of your mouth. Great plants though. Flowers in the spring, nice glossy leaves all season. The red chokeberry has red fruit. The black chokeberry has black fruit. And you can see the fall color is amazing. The fruit persists into winter until it ferments, and then the birds eat it, and they're quite entertaining. You can make jams, jellies, and wine out of the fruit as well. Erecta, still available, you may have to do a little hunting, is more narrow and upright than the others. Maybe you need something big. Sugar maples, like moist, well-drained soils, avoid street side, but have it in a place more of a park-like or landscape setting. Moist, well-drained soils, but Temple's upright, still available, is a nice, narrow, upright variety they're using here as a screen. And of course, there's arborvitae. This, I'm not sure what cultivar this is. There are several available and they're listed on your handout and you'll find more. But I wanted to show you, here's the garden side and here's what he's hiding with that planting, his mechanics of his landscape. Sting is a new one out of proven winners, only 1.5 feet tall and up to 15 to 20 feet 1 to 1.5 feet wide, 15 to 20 feet tall, and so very narrow and upright. So grouping a few together for a nice vertical accent. If you want something heat and drought tolerant and something the deer tend not to eat, try an upright juniper. Troutman is a nice narrow upright one, good results. It can get phomopsis, but that's usually only occurs when it's stressed. So a nice narrow upright heat and drought tolerant animals tend to leave it be. Mountbatten's a little bit wider and only 12 feet tall. Star Power, relatively new, bred at Johnson's Nursery here in Wisconsin, 17 feet tall. It's a fast grower and very prickly. So wear long sleeves and leather gloves when you plant this one. And it gets to be fairly wide, 7 to 9 feet wide. If you've got a sheltered location, or those of you in the South, Chamaecyparis are wonderful evergreens, hardy, but they need a little shelter from winter wind and winter sun. This is soft serve, and what a great name. Nice and pyramidal. Somewhat, any of those dwarf conifers are going to be a little slow to get started. And if you opt to do them in containers, dwarf Alberta spruce does have issues with winter wind, winter sun, and spider mites, but it's good and hardy. We want to grow, if we're leaving them out year round, something at least 1 or 2 zones hardier. So if you're in a zone 5, you want something that's a zone 3 or 4 hardy. That's where the dwarf Alberta spruce come in. Or overwinter them in an unheated garage or sink the pot in the ground for winter to protect those roots. And I have a link to information. Don't forget about ornamental grasses. This is our native switchgrass. I would do a cultivar because the species reseeds readily and will take over, but the cultivars tend to be clumpers, and it makes it a lot easier to add to small and medium-sized landscapes. Featherweed grass, Carl Forster, probably the most famous of this group of grasses, not native, but very narrow and upright. And I like the way they've used this in front of a fence because it can be very narrow and upright. I saw this used at a commercial property, and they cut back all the perennials and left these stand, and it looked kind of strange because you'd hit like exclamation points, but they were so scattered that it didn't hold together. So if you're leaving them stand and you don't have a mass planting like this, you might want to leave your perennial stand for winter. Good for the pollinators anyway, increases hardiness, better view. And I like this because you got strong vertical accent and strong round geometric flower heads from these alliums. This is that place you can see that elevated garden I showed earlier, and they just used a compact switchgrass, fountain grass to kind of create just a little sheltered area here. Espalier, only if you like to prune and you're willing to do some aggressive pruning. This gardener used this all around their patio. They could still see out because they had a huge landscape, but it defined that space. So it felt like you had, like windows to the landscape. You'd get flowers. These were pears, flowers and fruit, and fall, kind of a yellowish fall color, but you've got to be willing to do a lot of pruning. This was at Olbrich Botanic Garden years ago in Madison, Wisconsin. And they trained this apple, espaliated onto a decorative fence, and they used this in front of the arborvitae. So it kind of broke up that green screen the arborvitae provided. This is from Chicago Botanic Garden. And if you have a chance, go to the fruit and vegetable island and you'll see lots of different espalier. So here they've trained it up against a brick wall. This is a trumpet vine. That's one way to keep it contained. Lots of pruning and espalier it. Here's a fan. You could kind of see it's got branches going in a multiple directions. And can you imagine how much pruning? If you don't do the pruning, you've kind of wasted your time getting and money getting an espalier to start with. Palmette. And here we have another one. This was at Minnesota Arboretum, and this is a Belgium fence. And so they've trained the fence. What I liked is you could see the planting below, but it provided privacy for the people in the gazebo at sitting level. So kind of a neat way of using this. And so often we end up with bare ankles on our shrubs anyway. Take advantage. Using vines to shade areas, to shade sides of our home is a great way to save energy and increase the comfort during the heat of the summer. And I love deciduous vines for being in the north because you don't have leaves when you want to sit out there when the temperatures cool in spring and fall. For our southern friends, maybe the winter. But then in the summer, you've got the shade to help keep that area cool. Again, the invasive sweet autumn clematis, but boy, you'd have fragrance and shade over this swing. This is Arctic kiwi again, a hardy kiwi. I just wanted to show you this. So here they're using it as a shade plant, but look at how vigorous. You need a good, strong support and give it some guidance. My friend Chris thought her chickens needed a little shade, so she trained some morning glory up the shade, the chicken coop. And I love this. And there's a link on how to make these living willow arbors and archways on your handout. I was so excited to see this. I haven't tried it at home. Maybe this year. I want to do this for my grandkids when they come to visit. These are just in smart pots, willow saplings they trained into a dome. And then shading your air conditioner, you can reduce cooling costs, energy use by as much as 10%. Shading the east, west, or south walls, especially with a deciduous plant for those of us in the north, because we want that sun to come in on the south side. But the east and west are very important. Shading the windows, shading that side of the house, and even using vines to do it. Double your impact. I'm going to wrap up here as quickly as I can. Having vines that bloom at different times, you extend the bloom time, or have them that bloom at the same time, like the rose and the clematis, and you double the floral impact. Here we've got honeysuckle and sweet summer love clematis, equally assertive. You want to make sure, otherwise you end up with one vine anyway showing off. Have some fun. We did this at State Fair. Bamboo stakes. We trained pole beans up, and it was a way to have a little teepee for the kids to hide in. Hyacinth bean vine, I mentioned, is very vigorous. They use this to cover an archway in this garden area. Wouldn't that be fun for the kids to run through? Not real practical, but for fun. A tower of coleus, and New Guinea impatiens. And I was in Encinitas one November and they had poinsettias along the street. How cool is that? So maybe you do a mini version of that. Repurposed items. So here's a fountain turned into an herb garden. Down in Florida, they put bromeliads and Spanish moss. I just thought that was gorgeous. This is a metal scoop. I wasn't sure. I'm trying to find out with Burro's tail. And if you've grown Burro's tail, it breaks apart easily. So you've got to be careful as you plant that. But the small containers hold limited soil. So using succulents is a good idea. If you get to the Wisconsin State Fair, you've seen lots of repurposed items become containers. Here, old lockers provide the vertical accent, and she covered it with all kinds of planters from repurposed items. Old windows painted, mounted to the wall with window boxes below for planting space. Old twin mattress springs. Shoe caddies were quite popular, and we did this one year at State Fair, but a small amount of soil, so you need to be willing to water several times a day as the temperatures rise, or have irrigation and a timer. Pallets, of course, we have an activity on my website at belindamyers.com on a different way of doing pallets. I did a mini version, but using landscape fabric to create pockets in between the deck boards and plant them up, and lots of different options for using them in the landscape. PVC pipe, quite popular as we do hydroponics, but adding some paint really adds to the appeal. Gutters. And I like what they did here. They notice how the gutters aren't straight across. So the top one drains to the one below it, to the one below it, and then they also recirculated the water. So green walls, having planters right up against the wall. So here, impatiens and licorice vine. These you can buy these little cells. There's a variety, different varieties, but I gave you one brand. So you plant those up and mount them on a wall. I loved what they did here. They used multiple ones throughout that area. This is Chicago Botanic Gardens last year green wall, and it was breathtaking. 2x4 is your frame, backed by plywood, filled with potting mix. Cover it with landscape fabric, maybe some lattice, chicken wire, or some way to hold the plants in place. And this was a few years ago, and you could kind of see the mechanics. Watering from top to bottom is important. This was at Ball Horticulture, and you can visit. Their gardens are open to the public in West Chicago, but these are fabric planters on a wall with a lot of house plants. It was a shady area. We were sitting in a shaded area. Spider plants, caladiums, philodendrons, crotons in the sunnier end. Check this out. These look like they're leather. This was Dawn when I sent her on to a conference I couldn't go to. I was working, and look at how they covered this fence with these packets. This is one's called a living wall. It's expensive, but it has a built-in irrigation. These pots slide in and out. So let's say something in the middle dies, you can slide the one next to it out, take the one with the dead plants in, and then replace them as needed. And so you could maybe decide where you put the one, or maybe have some backup plants. Great if you've got an area where you can plug it in, hook it up to your faucet because it's on a timer and it waters, making the job easier. Just a different view of that system. You can buy them like this. Again, remember the amount of soil. This was at Ball Horticulture at their field days, and they took old picture frames, created a box in the back, and then painted them different colors and mounted them on a lattice divider. Succulents, again, are a good choice because of the limited amount of soil. And maybe using artwork. Obelisk, this is at Rotary Gardens, and they're well known for their obelisk, but here it's in a garden with alliums, and look at how it provides that vertical interest. In their formal garden, painted blue, I think they painted them different colors depending on the year and the theme of the garden. I loved what this gardener did, kind of blocked sort of the less than attractive areas and separated the more formal garden from that more natural area. And I'm a huge fan of Chihuly artwork. This was I think I took this picture at the Atlanta Botanic Garden. Amazing garden. If you get to Seattle, go to Chihuly's glass garden at the bottom of the Space Needle. But beautiful. He often has displays at botanic gardens and conservatories, and definitely worth visiting. But just look at how gorgeous that is. But to be honest, I don't have that in my garden because it's too expensive, at least the Chihuly originals. But this is what Innis Woods, located just outside of Columbus, Ohio, did one year. They painted dowel rods and they harvested twigs and they painted those and they gave a vertical accent. So it's not Chihuly artwork, but it's a much more affordable and pretty option. Or if you're into repurposing items, get some colorful glass and put it on stakes. Drill some holes in some pebbles and put them on a rebar, or mount some glass work on a support. This is at Ball Horticulture. Go big, right? You probably won't be doing this, but it's always nice to see some possibilities. I know we went through a lot very quickly, and I wanted to focus on the plant information and just kind of inspire you for different ways to use vertical accents in the garden. I always end every talk by asking you to help me grow gardeners. Someone inspired you, inspire someone else, whether it's a youngster in your life, it's a young family gardening for the first time, a recent retiree. I want to grow a kinder and gentler world, one garden and gardener at a time, and I'm going to need your help to do it. We know how good we feel. Let's help others find that joy. When you're digging, be safe. I want to remind you to be safe. Call 811, or if you're in Wisconsin, Diggers Hotline, Julie in Illinois, Gopher in Minnesota, and I forget what it is. Apologize to my friends in Michigan and Texas and Georgia. But if you call 811 and there's a link to find how you can go online in any state, file at least in Wisconsin 3 days in advance, anytime before you put a shovel in the ground. Keep you safe. Avoid inconvenience of, say, knocking out the cable, and also save you money. You hit an underground utility and didn't ask for it to be marked in advance, you're responsible for the repair. Again, thanks to We Energies for sponsoring this webinar and the library series. Also to Milwaukee Public Library, Kelly and her team for hosting the event and posting it on their YouTube when we're done. And to all our partners at the public libraries across Wisconsin and the UP of Michigan. And thanks to all of you for taking time to join me. I know we're all very busy and it's planting season, so we've got a lot to do. Some of you are changing to summer, some of us are just getting started. But I appreciate you taking time. I've got more events coming up. They're on your handout and they're almost all free. The Pollinator Celebration is a fundraiser, but it's a fun weekend event. So please stay connected. If you've posted a question, ask it tonight because I'm a little behind, but I do Facebook post, a little bit on Pinterest and YouTube, and try to stay connected. Phew. I know I went through that quickly, and hopefully the handout helps you, and the recording will be available, so you can always fast forward through the part you don't want to review.
Well, thank you, Melinda. So, just as a reminder, the link to the handout is in the chat. And of course, we are recording this session tonight. So, we'll send out the email with a link to the recording on Milwaukee Public Library's YouTube channel, along with that handout again. So, please add your questions to the Q&A. There's a little button on the bottom of your screen. You can add the questions there for Melinda, and we will get started. So, our first question is from Allison, who asks, how does vertical gardening do in a high tunnel?
Oh, so yeah, so you could jumpstart this. So I'm guessing what you're wondering. So you could grow there. The good news is, okay, I'm going to start this over. So I'm guessing with the high tunnels. So low tunnels are usually a couple feet tall. High tunnels are, 4 or 5. So you could get your tomatoes started and then pull off the cover as the season warms. There are short peas. I didn't throw peas in here. I need to pot up some peas. There's some good short varieties of peas that would do well, and that would be a good one in the cooler parts too, if you're jump starting even earlier. And there's like Sugar Ann, Snack Hero, which is got sugar edible potted peas that are about the size of green beans, snap beans that plant's about 24 inches tall. So I'm guessing you want to know if there are plants that you could grow underneath your high tunnel. And I'm guessing you pull back the cover in the summer when the temperatures rise. So it'd be a great way to get started. You may need to extend if you're growing indeterminate tomatoes that are too tall, or vines as well, some of the annual vines. You may even want to grow things over annual vines over the outside, so as you pull back the cover, you could do that, or start them inside and let them twine around as they get bigger. So I'm not sure I'm answering that question, Allison. So if I didn't, maybe give me a little guidance again of what you're thinking.
Our next question is from Betty. Betty's asking, is it better for clematis to prune the plant in the fall or in the spring?
You know, I like to leave them stand for the winter, increases hardiness, unless you have stem wilt. If you have stem wilt, that's where the stems turn black. Cut it right back to the ground and get rid of those diseased stems. The plant will survive. I've seen clematis with stem wilt a couple years in a row, and then the weather's better and the cleanups worked, and and then it's disappeared because the root system is fine. The crown actually is fine. It's just the stems. So those I would definitely do in the fall. I like to leave it stand for a couple reasons. I often find birds in there, so for a little shelter. Again, I like that screening that's available. It increases hardiness, but it won't hurt to prune it back in the fall after it's dormant, as long as it's not one of the early spring bloomers. If it's one that blooms before the leaves come out, it's blooming on old wood, then you prune it after. But like the fall bloomers, the summer bloomers, those bloom on new growth. You can prune them back usually 6 to 12 inches above the ground. And I just find that doing it before growth begins, late winter, early spring, um, growth begins quickly, those wounds close up, and I increase the hardiness. And I give a place I find a lot of the birds in mine over the winter kind of just seeking shelter among the vines. So it's kind of what your gardening goals are.
Got update from Allison regarding the high tunnel question. Allison says, thank you. The high tunnel is 10 feet tall. It's
Okay.
similar to a greenhouse. So,
Yeah, and you know what? I was in a high tunnel in Vermont where they grew tomatoes and they trained them on the strings. I didn't have a picture of that on this group, but they trained them on strings. And we were there in July and they were picking, and this was Vermont. So, yes, you could definitely grow any of those crops under that 10-foot high. So, excellent. Lucky you, Allison. That's great.
great. Thanks everyone for sending your questions in. Just as a reminder, please add them to that Q&A box. You'll see the button on the bottom of your screen. So our next question is from Barb. Barb is asking, Spirea bushes are not coming back except for a few leaves. They blossomed in the fall with the warm weather. Should I cut them all the way down or let them go or dig them out?
Great question. So, with the fluctuating temperatures, this is going to be a very interesting year. I'm guessing maybe Barb, you're in the north, so I should make that assumption. But one of my concerns is we had a dry and a very open winter. As much as I hate shoveling snow, I'd rather have snow cover because that's better insulation for the plants. We started out, at least in this part of the country, with a lot of rain early and very dry at the end. I know some of my friends in Ohio, they had a very dry season too. And so if you had a dry season or ended the season dry, the plants were under stress if you weren't able to water. Then, as you mentioned, we had that warm fall. So often plants will bloom out of season, like lilacs and forsythia. That usually the plant comes back. You just don't get as many flowers in the spring. I would wait. I'm a believer. A friend of mine had a Japanese tree lilac in a very challenging place, and I went to take a look at it and half of it wasn't leafed out. And I'm like, well, are you going to replace it now? No. Okay, why don't you wait and see? Well, it's come back. I'm not sure what happened, but it did come back, a few dead branches here and there. If those branches on your spirea are pliable, you could do the thumb test, scrape it. I don't always find that works well for me. So I usually do see if it's pliable. Sometimes what happens, we get the warm spell in winter followed by cold. And if the buds have started to expand, sometimes that they will die. The other good thing about spirea is the root system. So as long as it didn't die from drought, chances are even if the top died back, you can prune spirea pretty severely and it will come back. A lot of people just prune it back a couple inches above ground. Unless you want to get rid of them, I would wait and see what happens. I'll tell you, I'm in southeast, well, I'm kind of west of Milwaukee, if you know where Milwaukee, Wisconsin is, kind of between Madison and Milwaukee. And boy, I've been watching my stuff. I keep reminding myself it's not that late and things are just starting to leaf out. I have a hypericum I'm worried is dead, but I'm going to wait and I might cut it back to the ground. And then if it doesn't sprout out, then I'll replace it. But I'm going to give it a little more time. So depending on where you live, see if the branches are pliable. If you don't want to replace it, cut it back if they're dried and brittle, and then wait and see.
Had a couple questions about growing vegetables. Laura is asking, why did you say that you get an extra crop out of pole beans? Do they flower and produce twice?
Well, so if you've grown beans, snap beans, they produce over a longer period of time. And so typically your pole beans produce even longer. And so they always refer to it as you get an extra picking. So when your bush beans would be done and shut down, the pole beans tend to keep producing. So it's not, I probably should change. That's kind of how I've read it in the past. And so I probably should just say it produces longer. So, when your bush beans have done, you're still getting beans. You got to keep harvesting though, and beans, just like any vegetable. If you don't keep picking them, they're not going to keep producing. They're going to set seed and they don't taste as good anyway. So, one of my challenges with snap beans is getting out there often enough to pick on a regular basis. And so that's the other reason. The easier it is to do, right? The more likely you are to do it. So thank you for that asking for clarification.
Got a question from Michelle. Any pointers to get cucumbers and zucchinis to produce fruit? I've never been able to get them to grow, and Michelle's located in Brookfield, Wisconsin.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for letting me know where you are. So and cucumbers and zucchini have separate male and female flowers. And so the first flush to come out are male, and the second flush are male and female. And then temperature can be quite an influence on pollination, not only in tomatoes and peppers, which you've probably read about, but even cucumbers with the production of the male and female flowers. So a lot of times, part of the problem is we see all those flowers and we don't see any fruit. We need to wait. Make sure you have good pollinator plants nearby to get the pollinators to come, or you can go with a cotton swab or a little kid's watercolor paintbrush and spread the pollen around. And that would help. You may want to try some different varieties. Again, the benefit of going vertical is you get good airflow. Those flowers are a little more exposed, so it might be easier for the pollinators to reach them. I have great success with Ostia zucchini. I buy my seeds through Renee's. I don't work with them, but that's the only place I found them. Variegated leaves, so they're beautiful, very productive in a bush type zucchini. And I've had great success with that. One kind of thing that I learned just a few years ago is they found when you plant, cover your plants with row cover, your cucumbers and your zucchini, your squash and your melons. Cover them with row cover. It lets air, light, and water through. Then when you get the flowers forming, you need to uncover it, right? So the pollinators can get there. But I think it was Iowa State University that found, but we do that, you reduce the risk of squash bugs and squash vine borer on your zucchini and squash, and cucumber beetles, which carry bacterial wilt on cucumbers. The other thing that'll do for us when we have cooler weather is it speeds up growth and it shortens the time to flowering. So that should help as well. So avoid high nitrogen fertilizer. Have a soil test if this is a common problem. But if everything else is blooming, it just may be a matter of pollination too.
Our next question is from JN. They're asking, quality vertical supports are so expensive. Do you have any recommendations like for alternatives? I know you shared some upcycled items in the presentation. That was very helpful.
Yeah, and if anybody in the chat, please throw your ideas in. I am a big upcycler. I'll tell you, I hate watering wands. I feel like I buy a new one every year. I'm going to use those for a small support because I'm like my ode to watering wands. Um, a woman at my talk on Saturday uses twin mattress frames that fold in half, and she folds them and makes them into a support. Animal fencing, I live near, I'm out in the country a little more, so it's kind of that wire mesh, it's 4x4 um, kind of fencing and making it into a teepee that you could train cucumbers or even your tomatoes over. T-posts are not that beautiful, but you could use those for the secure part. And then lattice fencing is fairly inexpensive. And so wiring that in place would be another option. If you know a welder, rebar is a great structure. I buy Texas tomato towers and they are pricey, I'll admit that, but they're going to last me for as long as I keep gardening. And then I'll probably be able to give them away to my daughter for her, and she can give them to her kids. So it's an investment I look for. So I think looking for any items that have structure, old light post, that you may have taken down or somebody has. I'm trying to think of some of the other things I have seen. Going to thrift stores, going to garage sales. Sometimes garden shows have people selling antiques, usually upcycling that can be kind of expensive. The pallets can be good, just using rebar to anchor them into the ground. I use a lot of rebar. I have sandy soil, so I always need to go pretty deep. I use a lot of T-posts and try to decorate them with maybe some lattice that's a little less expensive, or just getting my vines growing up. I've used a bike wheel on a post to grow my beans. Not real pretty, but it was fun. I used an old gate that came with our property that was kind of discarded in the junk pile they left for us. So I think kind of looking for some of those and then maybe using the less attractive posts to secure them and your plants to cover them might be an option.
Great ideas. And if anyone else has any other ideas, drop them in the
Yes.
chat, please. All right, our next question is from Laura. Laura's asking, what was the name of the book you referred to during the asparagus slide?
Oh, it's called, hang on, I'm looking over here. Foodscaping.
Mm.
It's on my shelf over here. Charlie Nardozzi, who is based in Vermont but travels all over, great guy, good speaker. Foodscaping. And he talks about ways of using edible plants for ornamental beauty. So instead of putting a crab apple, you grow an apple tree. The asparagus I mentioned, I was lucky enough, we were speaking at home and garden show in St. Louis at the same time, and I sat in on his talk, and that's where I first saw the asparagus used as a divider. And then I was in Vermont and saw that gardener using it as a divider as well. So check out Foodscaping by Charlie Nardozzi, and I think it's Nardozzi. But Google will, if you go Foodscaping, they'll get you to it. It's from Cool Springs Press, I think, is the publisher.
Right, the next question is from Ginny. Ginny's asking for any suggestions for a compact tree, shallow roots that would be behind a rock waterfall that could help accent the water feature.
So, if you are in an area where some of the smaller Japanese may, I don't know if that's going to be small enough for you. Japanese maples, like a little afternoon shade, moist soil. Um, Most tree roots go down 12 inches no matter the species. Um, but they need somewhat of a sheltered location. And depending on where you live, it may not be hardy. There's Tina is a crab apple. I don't know how small you're looking. Tina is a crab apple. That would be a possibility. Um, I've used elderberry, black lace elderberry, but you know how big that can get and sometimes dies back for me and kind of pruned it to almost look like a Japanese maple. Um, I'm trying to think of some nice compact. Redbud gets fairly good size. Um, uh, I'm trying to find a Cornus moss. It's kind of big, but I'm looking for one that size. If anybody is, um, some wonderful gardener gave me a couple plants, and I finally found some spice bush, but it gets to be 8 to 12 feet tall. Some people train shrubs into tree form. You may have seen, I have a weeping lilac that's on a standard trained, and so it cascades down. And I've had great success. It's probably 25 years old. I do have to remove the suckers, but it's a weeping lilac. It might be hard to find, so it's grafted onto a standard. I know I've seen them do that with Miss Kim lilac, where they've had to manage it. Also, dappled willow I've seen trained into a tree form. I wouldn't probably do the dappled willow because willows tend to have really aggressive root systems, but that may be a possibility. Even a rose, a tree rose, where they've pruned roses into tree form. There's also the panicle hydrangea. I'm seeing a lot of limelight pruned into a tree form. You'd need to prune the top to keep it small. So I don't know if that's too upright for what you're looking for. There are some dwarf ginkgos that are nice and low growing. If you go to, unfortunately, they retired, but fox willow pines used to have lots of great low growing plants. Even some of the weeping conifers might be an option if you've got good sunlight. There is a weeping hemlock if it's a shady area. So, what I would do is if you've got a garden center near you or a nursery, but I would start doing a search on dwarf evergreens because I think that would give you a nice backdrop. And there are some dwarf spruces, there's some that have that nice pendulous form that would kind of, I don't know if that's what you're looking for. And also dwarf ginkgos that are pretty cool and nice, and dwarf hemlock if it's a shady area. So I would start doing a little search, and then you're going to probably have to find somebody who sells them, which could be the challenge.
Okay, thank you, Melinda. So everyone, I just dropped a link in the chat for the Foodscaping book. If
Thank you.
you want, sure, if you wanted to request a copy through the Milwaukee County Federated Library System, but if you're not part of that system, check your local library to see if they have a copy as well. So our next question is from Catherine. Catherine is wondering, does it help contain invasive species if you plant them in pots or containers?
So invasive and I want to just differentiate between aggressive and invasive. So aggressive plants are the bullies in the garden. They're the ones that'll take over your garden bed, but they stay in your landscape. Invasive plants are the things that leave our landscape and invade woodlands, wetlands, and that type of thing. So a lot of them, think about Dame's rocket, which is probably about ready to bloom in my neck of the woods. Fragrant flowers, often put in wildflower mixes. It is not native, but it spreads by seed. And so even in a pot, unless you remove the flowers before it sets seed, it's going to spread and go beyond the pot. Things like mint and oregano are often put in containers, and I grow chives, oregano, and mint in pots on my patio away from the soil. And I have to tell you, I find oregano in the ground. And I think the birds must be eating some of it, or I don't know, or the seeds spread. I have chives in the cracks of my patio. I need to harvest those flowers or at least deadhead before they set seed. So it can slow it down. If you sink the pot in the ground, and that's what some people do, they'll plant mint and sink the pot in the ground. But what I've seen is the roots come out the drain holes, which you need because otherwise it could just get soggy and waterlogged and root rot if you get a wet period. But then I see the roots coming out or even climbing over the edge of the pot and spreading into the garden. So if it's an aggressive plant, a lot of it's digging and dividing and you managing it or putting it in a pot on a patio deck or someplace else to keep it away from the plantable space in ground where those plants might grow and spread.
Our next question is from Teresa. So asking for the mid-Missouri area. Are there any fast-growing evergreens for that area?
Well, if you're not looking for a dwarf evergreen, there's junipers that are hardy throughout North America. So those are fairly fast growing. Where we get into slow growing is typically when we want something that's only going to grow a certain height and stop, like 8 to 10 feet. So when you look at the tag, and this is kind of expanding your opportunities, hopefully, if you look at the tag, and a lot of times with the conifers, with the evergreens, they'll say, it gets to be X feet tall in 10 years because they only grow 3 to 6 inches in a year. So if you're growing like a straight species of arborvitae, the species grows 40 to 60 feet tall. That grows pretty fast. But if you're growing Techneto, because you only want it 8 feet tall, it's going to be 4 to 6 feet tall in 10 years. And so the downside is when you're looking for something small scale, it's going to take longer for it to reach its mature height. And that's why when you buy a plant that's a little bit bigger, that's a dwarf conifer or dwarf deciduous plant, it's more expensive because it's older. And so junipers are good for heat and drought. And some of those I showed you, Star Power should be fine. And that's a prickly one. That is a fast growing plant, but it gets big. It's like 15 feet tall and 7 feet wide. And the animals tend to leave them alone. It's kind of a bluish green, very pretty, but very prickly. Um, the native red cedar can be spreading. I see it reseeding around, so you may not want that because it may pop up in other areas that you don't want it to grow. Arborvitae, again, the species is great. Animals tend to like it. Techne is 15 feet tall at maturity, fairly fast growing. Techneto is the shorter one that's much slower. The one I showed you, which was Sting Arborvitae from Proven Winners, relatively new. It's again, it's going to be about 6 feet tall and in 4 to 6, I think it was 6 feet tall in 10 years. The height I gave you was the ultimate. So looking for those straight species, they're going to be bigger, but they'll be faster growing.
Our next question is from Deborah. Deborah shares, I planted scarlet red runner beans for the first time as a greenery screen. Any tips on maintaining them? They are about a foot high right now, and Deborah's located in southeastern Wisconsin.
So if they are outside, kind of just keep an eye on the weather, because we typically start planting our bean seeds now. And scarlet runner beans are a wonderful choice. The hummingbirds love them. They're beautiful, and the beans are edible. So it looks like we don't have any freezing temperatures in the near forecast, but if there is, I'd probably throw a sheet over it just to be sure. They are kind of borderline frost hardy if the plants are up a foot high and they're outside. Full sun, they're pretty easy to grow. Japanese beetles will go after your beans. There is an organic product called Beetle Juice, J-U-S, or Beetle Gone, G-O-N-E. It's a strain of Bacillus thuringiensis galleria, naturally occurring soil bacteria that they found killed certain beetles and their larvae, including Japanese beetles. So since you're eating it, you probably don't want to use a more traditional synthetic chemical. You can't cover them. They don't need bees to pollinate, but you want the hummingbirds. So, and who wants to look at row cover all summer? So I would just kind of keep an eye. University of Minnesota found if you pick off those Japanese beetles, the first ones to arrive, the plant gives off less chemical scent, encouraging more. So take care of the early arrivals, and that takes care of it. Last year it wasn't a bad Japanese beetle year for many of us. For some it was. So who knows? We'll wait and see and keep an eye out for them.
Great. So our next question is from Mule Public Library, and I just want to give a shout out to all the libraries that have tuned in
Yes.
tonight as well. I know there are a few of them. I did see Mohawk also. So Mule Public Library is asking, how do you get rid of a dappled willow? Thank you.
And I have to say, when I was working with a different garden center, it was one of Melinda's choice. And I love that plant, but it is very aggressive. And so digging is probably the only non-chemical method, and then monitor for any. If you cut it back to the ground, you could treat the stump with a brush killer, and that's absorbed by the roots, or a total vegetation killer. A lot of folks are not using Roundup anymore. It may not be on the market for a while. There's a product called Finale, Finale, that also has a different mode of action that is translocated into the roots. But painting, I think the other is triclopyr you can use as well. Check the label. So if you cut it back to the ground, if you can't dig it out, cut it back, treat the stump, and then watch for suckers, because it may send up some suckers. So it's not going to be a once and done, but that would help slow it from regrowing. Otherwise, digging is really your only non-chemical, or continually cutting it to the ground anytime you see suckers or growth, and eventually starve it to death.
Inquiry from Patricia next up here. Patricia is asking, Melinda, would you talk about Will Radler? Knockout Rose Day is May 9th. And
Oh,
Rosarium is open from 2 o'clock to 7 o'clock p.m. 10020 West Meadow Drive, Greenfield, Wisconsin.
Will Radler, the breeder of Knockout Rose, his place is amazing. You should go if you're in Greenfield. He opens his house up usually a couple times a year. He's very generous with sharing the beauty of his yard. You'll get to see where he does his breeding in the backyard. You get to see a lot of he's not only breeds roses, he breeds some perennials and fish. So he's quite the amazing scientist horticulturist. And so his gardens are beautiful. There's water features, there's a huge pond for the koi, well, several ponds for the koi. There's a 3-story shed, and there's an observation deck so you can see the gardens, several sitting areas. It's in an area that tends to flood, so he's got lots of elevated gardens, a huge collection of plants. So if you're in the Greenfield area, which is just outside of Milwaukee, excellent. And I know during the Greenfield Garden Tour, he usually opens it as well. You know what? Thanks for that. I'm going to add that. I will do a Facebook post too, um, and try to remember. I will try to remember to do it when he opens his house too. So if you're in the area, add that to your stop. It's just amazing. So thank you for that shout out for that.
I just say I have also been there as well for a fundraiser, and it was just such a fantastic house. And it's before I really knew anything about plants too. So it's, even a novice gardener, you would definitely enjoy it. So
So if you're traveling with someone who's not a
yeah.
gardener, they'll still have
Mhm.
a good time.
Yeah. Uh, all right, so we're coming to our last question for tonight. This is from Judy. Judy says, my sister lives north of Denver, Colorado. She wants to purchase smaller type shrubs, no larger than 6 inches tall. Do you know a nursery she could use?
Okay. Here's I don't know the nurseries in that area. Sooner Nurseries out of Oklahoma, they do mail order. The Denver Botanic Garden may be a place to go. Colorado State University is amazing with their resources. So I'm guessing she wants just short starter plants.
So,
I,
oh,
oh,
sorry to interrupt. Judy says, sorry, 6 foot tall shrubs,
oh,
not
6 foot tall.
6 inch.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Lots of good. There's Colorado State University, they and the growers have a great plant evaluation program, and I forget the name of it. Judy, I will get you some links. I'm going to also, for our friend in Missouri, looking for a fast evergreen in case I can find one that I didn't talk about. And Judy, for 6 foot tall shrub, a nursery source north of Denver, right? North of Denver. And then a small tree by a water. That's my homework. So I'll see what I can find out. I'll send that information to Kelly and she'll include it so you all get to read it, whether you want to or not. So we'll definitely I'll do some follow up tomorrow and get that to Kelly so she can get it out to all of you.
Thanks, Melinda. So, as
Thank you. And thanks to everyone who joined us this evening.
Absolutely. Thanks to everyone tuning in. So we are recording this. We'll send the link out in that follow-up email within a few days here, and then we'll have the extra information that Melinda will send along as well, along with the handout. And then next week we'll be right back here for is it managing water on your property on May
I think
15th?
Oh, is that May? I think it's the following week.
Oh, let's double check
Uh-oh.
our schedules.
Yes, let's all check. I'm like, uh-oh, uh-oh. Let me just do a
We will
quick,
double check.
we will double check. We'll put that
Yes.
in the email as well. But
Exactly.
managing
Yeah.
water it may be the 15th. I was thinking it was, you're probably right. So sorry, it's not tomorrow. Don't
Uh,
listen to me.
yep.
So we will be back on a Thursday though, instead of a Wednesday. So
Excellent. All right. And then one more comment from Patricia says thank you to Melinda and the libraries. Will Radler's Rosarium will be open 4 or 5 more times as fundraisers. May 9th is for PBS.
oh,
So
excellent.
outstanding. All right. Well,
Thank
thanks
you
so
all.
much. Yeah, thank you, Melinda, so much. And we'll see you again next week. And everyone have a great rest of your evening. And we'll see you next time. Bye now.
Goodbye.